it's difficult trying to pin down the writers who I think personally will have powerful voices, because it's too early to know. We've only been doing this kind of thing for 5 or 6 years in the whole history of science fiction. I mean, from the beginning, 1926, science fiction writers always dealt with problems of ecology, and always dealt with problems of the culture, and always dealt with the effects of science on people, but not in this way, not with this kind of strength, not with this almost pamphleteering kind of messianic urge.
Is this what you try to do?
I'm doing it quite a lot. I'm dealing in, well, for instance, with the last 2 stories I've done have been about the white man's stealing the black man's heritage, his birthright, of turning him into kind of a mocha-colored white man. And I've done it in fantasy terms. Pennies Off a Dead Man's Eyes deals with a black girl who is passing for white, whose father, the black man, has died. And at the funeral, when the funeral is over, she removes the silver dollars from his eyes, thereby consigning him to hell, or he can't get across the River Jordan. The dollars are to pay his way with the man. And a guy who was watching this, who was picked up by the father, and he calls himself a stray cat, goes after the girl to find out why she did it, and doesn't know that's his daughter. And when he finds her, finds out that she's passing, finds out why she hates the father, because the father rejected her. Yet he, the guy, is an alien from another planet who washed up on our shores, and the black man took him in and helped him learn to pass. And I play the counterpoint of an alien passing as an Earthman against a black girl passing as a white girl. Is, I think, the strangest story I've ever written, because I've dealt with this theft of a black man's birthright in completely symbolic terms and in completely fantasy terms. What I'm trying to do in my work is to take the burning issues of our times, he said pompously, and entertainmentize them, make them interesting to read, yet by the same token, when you get done with them, your gut will somehow have been affected.
What place does Dangerous Visions have in this scheme of things?
I think the place it has in this current movement, or in this current flow of the field, is that it's a rallying point. It's a demonstration. It was the kind of book that they said could not be done, that no one would publish it, that if it was published it would be ignored, and it wasn't. It was a book that received tremendous critical attention and seemed to be one of the first books in the vanguard of this new way of thinking. But I think Dangerous Visions solidified a lot of thinking for a lot of people, that they said, yes, we can go in other directions. No, we don't have to hold on to all the old formulas of science fiction. Yes, we can talk about sex. Yes, we can talk about religion. Yes, we can talk about labor relations and politics and coprophilia if we feel like it. So I think Dangerous Visions opened up doors that people didn't even know existed. And there are other people who have opened up doors similarly. Damon Knight with his Orbit series. Chip Delaney is now editing a magazine called Warp, paperback magazine, which will do more. There have been a few other anthologies and a few other... now some of the magazines are starting to do it, you see, because the magazines were the ones that held it back for so long, because they were the only markets. And as long as they were being sold on the newsstands, and as long as the mommies of the 14-year-old kids who read them were looking through them, they couldn't run anything very heavyweight. But now they have to compete. Now they have to keep up. And so they're starting to buy really topical and interesting and gut-wrenching stories.
Why did they think it couldn't be done?
Well, you see, what most people fail to realize about science fiction is that essentially it is a pulp medium. It started in the pulps. It's a commercial fiction. And all of the taboos that have hung on for 30 years, 40 years, with pulp magazines of all kinds, love story magazines, Western stories, detective stories, all of them were gathered into the science fiction field. These were all barriers that were imposed by the form, by the medium itself. I mean, a guy in a spaceship could take a 45-year journey from here to Proxima Centauri, and he never had to go to the bathroom once. And, you know, girls didn't have breasts in science fiction stories. God forbid, you know, if there was ever a relationship between a man and a woman, it was as as antiseptic as making love in an autoclave. And, you know, the stories of Doc Smith, the Lensman stories, are, you know, classics of that. And for what they are and what they do, they're great, because they have that great galloping sense of space and adventure and what Sam Moskowitz likes to call the sense of wonder in them. But God knows there isn't one human being from start to finish. I mean, they're all cardboard. And so that kind of restriction and taboo and order was built into stories all the way up into the 50s, when Tony Boucher and Mick McComas began Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. They said, no more of that. Let's start dealing with people, and let's start dealing in literary terms. And let's stop thinking of it as a pulp medium. Let's start demanding of speculative fiction, science fiction, that which is demanded of all good fiction, that it meet the requirements of literature. And it's taken the writers 15, 17 years to finally get to the point where, yes, now that the difference between, I mean, if there is a new wave and an old wave, the difference between old wave writers and new wave writers is that new wave writers think of themselves as artists, and they are not ashamed of the big A, whereas the others thought of themselves as storytellers and, you know, amusing entertainers. And artists can be storytellers, too. The one does not negate the other.
What was different about Dangerous Visions?
Well, the stories were written especially for the book. And so by intent, the anthology tried to go some places that anthologies had not gone before. As much vehemence as is put into restrictions on writers, as much as they're told, don't curse, don't write about unnatural sex, don't offend the establishment, by most of the commercial media, that was the same vehemence with which I told the writers, get it on, you know, really do it. I really want you to write what you've never written before. I want you to just put your stomach on paper. And I was lucky. Out of the 32 writers in the book, maybe 10 knew what I was talking about, and 10 were free enough to actually open and do it. And so with that kind of freedom, and knowing they had that kind of freedom in front, they, I think, opened their heads more than they would for an ordinary story they were doing.
What role do you think, again, Dangerous Visions and Last Dangerous Visions will play in this?
Dangerous Visions was good because it was the icebreaker. Again, Dangerous Visions is going to put people away. It is going to twist their minds, because it takes up where the heaviest stories in Dangerous Visions left off. It goes about 50 miles further toward real, complete, total literary freedom in the speculative fiction vein than anything in Dangerous Visions did. And the most impressive writing is being done by not the established writers with great reputations, but the young Turks. I mean, guys you may never have even heard of. Ken McCullough and Jim Hemisath and Jim Sutherland and Ed Bryant and the women, their minds are incredible. You can't believe it. Ursula Le Guin and Josephine Saxton, women like that are writing science fiction that's never been written before, because they're doing it with that special, strange, alien thinking that a woman has when she does it. And stuff. I expect to get some very strong criticism on the second book. There are some really far-out stories. And that's the best phrase I can think of to use for them. They are very explicit sexually. They are very explicit politically. They are very explicit style-wise. There are no soft, easy ways into any of these stories. They all come at you with their fangs bared and dripping. And I can't think of anybody who's going to ever walk away from this book the same way he went to it, even as apparently those who went at Dangerous Visions were changed.
What have been the reactions to Dangerous Visions?
Well, about 99% awe, joy, delight, approbation. People not thinking it could be done, of course. You see, most of the time, people don't write to you when they like something. They only write to you when they're ticked off about something. They only write when they're annoyed about something. Yet I got nearly 2,000 letters from people saying, thank you. You know, I mean, just that much. Thank you. one guy wrote, "My life was changed," which is, insanity too. But college students writing and saying, I've been shacked up with Silas Marner for the last 8 months, and I didn't know people were even writing like this. And writers writing in, and that's the important thing. Other writers writing in and saying, "My God, we can do it," and now their whole careers are changed, their lives are changed, and even the people who were annoyed, even the ones that I get crummy letters from, the tone of the letters tells me that I'm really jamming them, because Clausewitz was right. It doesn't matter whether you attack or you retreat, as long as you move, something happens. Let's see some life. The book was intended to shake things up, and I think that's what it did. In the process, it got an awful lot of critical attention, a lot of critical acclaim, and it wound up on the best book list of 17 different newspapers in the country. Chicago Book World put it on its best paperbacks of the year. It sold over 50,000 copies in various editions. It's been translated into 6 languages. It won more awards than any other science fiction book in the last 25 years, and all in all, it's pretty nice little job.
Where do you think things are going from here in terms of science fiction and what it has to say about the contemporary scene?
I think science fiction has some strange anomalies, or anachronisms about it, actually. It's beginning to use literary techniques that were outdated in the 30s. Now, it's beginning to use them. Yet at the same time, it has an imaginative content that is light years ahead of the mainstream in fiction. And I think that speculative fiction will continue to borrow the literary techniques of the mainstream, and the mainstream will kind of get a leak off or bleed off of imagination, and the two will merge in that way, and they will enrich each other. I think science fiction has now become an important, accepted literary medium, one that's viable and that's valid.
Alexei Panshin has written a criticism of science fiction a few months ago on fantasy and science fiction, in which he states an attitude he holds towards science fiction as being in the condition of the Elizabethan theater in 1590, waiting for Shakespeare. Do you think that's a valid assumption?
Not so much a Shakespeare. I don't think the field is looking for a Shakespeare as much as it is a, who was Thomas Wolfe's editor?
Maxwell Perkins.
Maxwell Perkins, that's what we need. We need dig it. We've already got writers now who are doing things no writer has ever done before. We've got writers who are so brilliant that there's no place for their work to go. They can't be published. Their best stuff can't be published. We don't need another Shakespeare, and we don't need a Shakespeare in our field. What we need now is an editor with literary credentials so big, so beautiful, so unassailable that he will be able to, a man who will take science fiction writers, the best science fiction writers, and get them their Globe Theater.
Then would you say you're optimistic? I mean that you think science fiction will help produce a better society.
Speculative fiction seems to be emerging as this kind of fiction, which isn't so peculiar, really, when you think about it, because speculative fiction is really the only optimistic fiction being written today, because it says there will be a tomorrow. It may be a lousy tomorrow, it may be a messed over tomorrow, but there'll be a tomorrow of some kind.
Not everyone would agree with Harlan Ellison about the importance of science fiction in today's world, or where it is going from here. Some would ask, where is the sense of wonder? Others, where is the science? Where is the extrapolation of the present into the future? But most of them would agree that science fiction is going somewhere. Where it is going in the final analysis is up to you, you who are watching this film today.
We seem to find ourselves in the midst of a revolution. It's a revolution of thought that's as important and as upending as the Industrial Revolution was, sociologically speaking. We're coming into a time now when all the old isms and philosophies are dying. They don't seem to work anymore. All the things that Mommy and Daddy told you and told me were true were only true in the house. The minute you get out in the street, they aren't true anymore. The kids in the ghetto have known that all their lives, but now the great white middle class is learning it. and it's coming a little difficult to the older folks, which is always the way it is. We're no longer just Kansas or Los Angeles or New York. It's the whole planet now. They got smog in the Aleutian Islands, man. They got smog in Anchorage, Alaska. They got smog at the polar ice caps. Can you believe it? Smog at the polar ice caps. There's no place you can go to hide anymore. So the days of thinking that the Thames or the English Channel or the Rocky Mountains was going to keep you safe from some ding-dong on the other side doesn't go anymore. A nitwit in Hanoi can blow us all just as dead as a nitwit in Washington. And so we're beginning to think of ourselves not as just an ethnic animal or a national animal or a local or family kind of animal. We're now a planetary animal. It's all the dreams of early science fiction coming true. I mean, slowly and with great pain, the world is beginning to think of itself as Earthmen. And it's kind of startling to see it happening because it's coming out of pain and blood and fire. But I guess that's where all important revolutions come from. What it is that we're beginning to realize and recognize ourselves as part, literally, of the universe, not just of ourselves and number one, but our responsibility to the entire universe. We throw a cigarette butt down on the grass, or we throw our picnic lunch in the lake. That's not just us getting rid of our garbage so we don't have to be burdened with it. Man, we are screwing up the ecology, and that's all the ecology. That's the whole planet. And that means that we're thinking in larger terms. So, incidentally, the emphasis on ecology now, I think, is another manifestation of that, even as the manifestation of revolution in so many countries in so many different forms speaks to that. So for this time of unrest, this time of turmoil, with revolution and dawning awareness of ourselves as one with the cosmos, we need a new literature that speaks to this kind of feeling and to these needs. Science fiction, speculative fiction, is speaking to all kinds of people. And I think that's because now it's becoming a fiction of the people. In essence, street fiction, which is a very old and a very common term for a fiction of the people. Even as the stories that Dickens wrote were written for the penny newspapers, were fiction of the people. Like I see, the trouble in colleges invariably boils down to the voice of the people is being heard, and people with authority here are saying, no, we've made our decision. We don't care what the people in the street say. And that can no longer work. That can just no longer work. Speculative fiction is emerging because it seems to manage to convey the feeling of the strangeness of the times, the blurring of reality and fantasy in our world. Now, if you don't think that we're living in a fantasy time, just say to yourself, the delegate to the United Nations is Shirley Temple. You know, and your head has to go somewhere else. You give people evidence of a slaughter at My Lai, you know, and it's more horrifying than any work of fiction could be. I mean, how do men who are supposed to be the lineal descendants of Jack Armstrong come to pull the trigger on women and children? How do they do that? You know, you look at the pictures and you see the mothers trying to throw their babies away because if they have to die, that's all right, but they don't want the kids to die. And the baby's blown apart in their arms, you know? Where, is this reality? It can't be anymore. I mean, we've come to another place in our development as human beings. And mainstream fiction, with all of its fusty traditions, you know, can wind up in the cul-de-sac of Portnoy's Complaint, which is literally masturbation, or it can go someplace else. And one of the places that it seems to be going is into speculative fiction, where dreams prevail. And the dreams seem more real than the reality these days. And that is what I think is the important gift that science fiction and speculative fiction have for our times. People just instinctively need an order to their universe. You can see it from the most primitive tribes to the present. We like a natural order. We like to know the answers, whether it's in Christianity or astrology or Zoroastrianism or whatever it may be. You know, the Druids, I'm sure, had the right answer, too. The answers that we're getting from the natural orders of the universe today are the wrong answers. They keep telling us that 1 and 1 is 6, and we go out and try and apply it, and it doesn't work. And we wind up in more trouble than before. And so people are looking around for new answers, which is why almost every chick in Los Angeles is into astrology, you know. I mean, science fiction writers, fantasists, are special kinds of dreamers. Their minds come from someplace else. Their thoughts are someplace else. They deal with this oneness with the cosmos every day in every story. And I think that if any fiction can offer us answers, can move us to action, it may well be speculative fiction. Maybe not in the same way that Uncle Tom's Cabin, you know, helped move the Civil War, or Frank Norris's books moved to social reform in the 30s, but perhaps in helping this revolution of thought, of literally opening people's minds, of unclogging the channels of the detritus, or detritus, however you pronounce it.
Well, I know you already mentioned the fact that science fiction hasn't taken the steps quite that Frank Norris took in trying to move society. And I know you said science fiction is a mirror and a sounding board for society, but I wonder if you think it'll ever or should take some kind of a path that's aggressive and try and move society.
Well, should, could, and will are three different things. Yeah, I think it should. I think it's the responsibility of any true artist with the talent to speak to people, to help try and change things for the better. I think it's his duty, it's his obligation to speak to his times. Whether it will do any good, whether anyone will pay any attention, I don't know. God knows science fiction has been talking about ecological imbalance and the echo crash, for God's sake, for, well, goes all the way back to Wells. And there's nothing more terrifying than John Christopher's No Blade of Grass, and that was done in the early 50s. Nobody paid any damn attention to that. We've been sounding the clarion call for years, and no one seems to pay attention.
Can you give us a couple of examples of writers who are dealing with contemporary issues in science fiction terms?
Most notable to my mind right at the moment is Norman Spinrad's book, Bug-Jack Barron, in which he deals with the effect of McLuhan media message on masses of people, on the effects of power and the uses of power in terms of media message, power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely, all that kind of nonsense, which, you know, is old hat. But he does it in the terms of the medium. I mean, the novel is written the same way you would watch a television show. I mean, it's the medium of the book is part of the message of the book. And I think it's a very effective book. Roger Zelazny is dealing with religion today in a very strange kind of reality fantasy way. He is re-examining various pantheons of gods, Hindu, Egyptian, in his various novels, and bringing them up to date and speaking about them in terms of our times and their relevance therefrom, or thereto, whichever is correct.